My name is Chandra, and I just turned 27 last month, right after graduating from law school. My grandparents raised me more than my parents ever did, and when they passed away, they left me their entire $6 million estate instead of giving it to my father, their only son. After seeing how my family reacted to the inheritance, I made the difficult decision to place everything in a trust. Last week, my parents and sister showed up at my door with suspicious smiles on their faces. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from and what you would do in my situation. Drop a comment and subscribe if this is your first time here. Looking back, I realize my bond with my grandparents was unusual from the very beginning. While most kids spent weekends with their parents at the park or movies, I was always at Grandma and Grandpa Miller's farmhouse just outside the city. It wasn't that my parents deliberately abandoned me, but they were always preoccupied with their careers and my younger sister, Lisa. Dad worked as a financial advisor at a prestigious firm downtown, often pulling 60-hour weeks and traveling for conferences. Mom managed her own interior design business, constantly meeting clients and attending industry events. They were ambitious people determined to climb the social ladder and maintain a certain lifestyle. Lisa came along when I was 6, and she quickly became the center of attention. She was the baby, the one who needed extra care and supervision. I was already the quiet, independent child who could entertain herself with books and imagination. It wasn't hard for my parents to justify leaving me with my grandparents while they focused on work and Lisa. Grandpa Miller, my father's. Father was a retired investment banker who had built his wealth through smart decisions and careful planning. He lived with Grandma in a sprawling farmhouse with 10 acres of land, complete with apple trees and a small pond for fishing. Their home became my sanctuary, my true home in many ways. Every Saturday morning, Grandma would wake me up with the smell of homemade cinnamon rolls wafting through the house. We would bake together, her patient hands guiding mine as I learned to measure flour and crack eggs. She was nothing like my mother, who preferred catered parties to cooking at home. Grandma believed in creating things with your own hands, in putting love into everyday activities. Grandpa taught me how to fish, setting up 2 chairs by the pond and explaining the value of patience. As we waited for the fish to bite, he would tell me stories about his own childhood, about the Great Depression his parents had lived through, about the importance of saving and planning for the future. When I was 9, Grandpa started teaching me about money in ways I could understand. He set up a small investment account for me, adding $20 each month and showing me how it grew over time. We would track the progress together, calculating interest and discussing basic economic principles. I soaked it all up like a sponge. My grandmother focused on teaching me different values. She emphasized honesty, integrity, and responsibility. She always said money can buy comfort, Chandra, but it can't buy character. You build that yourself, one decision at a time. Our evenings often involved sitting in their cozy living room, reading books together, or playing board games. Sometimes Grandpa would tune in to financial news, explaining concepts to me in simple terms. The foundations of my understanding of money, wealth, and responsibility were laid during these moments. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents grew increasingly distant. When I did spend time at home, Dad was usually locked in his office or glued to his phone. Mom flitted from one social engagement to another, often leaving me with babysitters even when she wasn't working. Lisa became accustomed to being the center of attention, throwing tantrums when she didn't get her way, which seemed to work remarkably well with my parents. As I grew older, I began to notice subtle tensions during family gatherings. When my father would mention some expensive purchase or investment opportunity, Grandpa would exchange knowing glances with Grandma. Once I overheard them discussing my father after a Thanksgiving dinner. "I worry about Jeffrey's spending habits," Grandpa said quietly. He seems to think money grows on trees. Your son lives beyond his means, Grandma replied with a sigh. I was 13 when Grandpa took me aside one summer afternoon. We were sitting by the pond, fishing rods, cast into the water when he said something I would never forget. Chandra, I want you to know that your grandmother and I have plans in place to secure your future. We see how smart and responsible you're becoming, and we want to make sure you have every opportunity to succeed. I didn't fully understand the implications at the time, but I felt the weight of his words, the trust they were placing in me. The farmhouse became even more of a haven during my teenage years. While my peers were dealing with high school drama and social pressure, I spent weekends helping Grandpa maintain the property or assisting Grandma with her elaborate garden. They encouraged my academic interests, celebrated my achievements, and provided the emotional support I rarely received at home. When I was accepted to college with a partial scholarship, my grandparents insisted on covering the remaining costs. They attended my orientation while my parents sent a gift card with their regrets, citing a business conference they couldn't miss. By this point, the pattern was well established. My sister Lisa, now a teenager herself, had grown into someone I barely knew. She was popular social and remarkably similar to our parents in her materialistic outlook. Our conversations were superficial when they happened at all. My grandparents continued to be my rock, my foundation. They never criticized my parents directly to me, never tried to turn me against them. Instead, they focused on building me up, on helping me become the best version of myself. Every summer and holiday break, I returned to their farm finding peace in the familiar routines and unconditional love they provided. Looking back now, I can see how they were preparing me for a future they had already envisioned. They were investing in me not just financially, but emotionally and intellectually. They were raising me to understand the true value of wealth, to see beyond the material trappings that seemed to consume my parents' lives. And I was learning, growing stronger in my convictions, developing the sense of responsibility that would eventually lead me to make the hardest decision of my life. Everything changed during my senior year of college. I was deep into finals week when I got the call from my mother. Her voice was flat, emotionless, as she delivered the news that Grandpa had suffered a massive heart attack. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. I remember sitting in my dorm room, phone clutched in my hand, unable to process what I'd heard. Grandpa, with his booming laugh and endless wisdom, was suddenly gone. The world tilted on its axis. The funeral was held 3 days later. I arrived at the farmhouse to find it filled with people I barely recognized, distant relatives and business associates. My father was shaking hands and accepting condolences with a somber expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. My mother stood beside him, perfectly dressed in black, her makeup impeccable despite the occasion. Lisa, now 17, seemed bored and kept checking her phone when she thought no one was looking. I felt like I was watching actors in a play, going through the motions of grief without feeling it. Grandma was different. Her pain was palpable, raw, and real in a way that made my heart break all over again. Yet she carried herself with dignity, receiving guests with quiet grace. When our eyes met across the room, I saw a flash of relief in hers. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered when I finally reached her side. After the funeral, as people mingled over catered food in the farmhouse, I overheard my father talking to his cousin in the hallway. "Dad was always conservative with his money," he said, loosening his tie. "That farm and the investments, it's got to be worth a few million at least. Once Mom settles in somewhere smaller, we'll have to figure out what to do with everything." His casual planning, the assumption that Grandpa's death meant access to wealth, made my stomach turn. I walked away before I could hear more. Grandma asked me to stay with her after everyone left, and I gladly agreed. We spent evenings looking through old photo albums, sharing memories of Grandpa. She seemed to be aging before my eyes, her grief etching new lines on her face. 3 months later, Grandma was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months, but she barely lasted 3. It was as if without Grandpa her will to live had diminished. She died peacefully in her sleep, holding my hand. The second funeral was smaller, more intimate. I felt numb, hollowed out by grief. In just a few months, I'd lost the 2 people who had been my true north, my guiding stars. The 2 people who had loved me unconditionally. After the service, we gathered at the family lawyer's office for the reading of the will. Mr. Gladwell, who had handled my grandparents' legal affairs for decades, looked solemn as he prepared to read the documents. My father sat forward in his chair, expectant. My mother perched beside him, her expression carefully neutral. Lisa twirled a strand of hair around her finger, clearly wishing she was elsewhere. Mr. Gladwell cleared his throat. To my son Jeffrey and his wife Patricia, I leave my collection of first edition books and the family photo albums. The rest of my estate, including the farmhouse, all investments, bank accounts, and personal belongings, I leave to my granddaughter Chandra, with the hope that she will use these resources wisely and in keeping with the values we have tried to instill in her. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face flushed crimson. $6 million, he finally sputtered. All of it to Chandra Im, their only son. My mother turned to me, her eyes cold. What did you do? She demanded. How did you manipulate them into this? Lisa laughed bitterly. Of course perfect Chandra gets everything. It's always been about her. I sat there stunned by both the inheritance and my family's reaction. Mr. Gladwell handed me a sealed envelope. Your grandmother asked that you read this privately, he said. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. My father had stormed out of the lawyer's office, my mother trailing behind him. Lisa had shot me a look of pure hatred before following them. I was alone with my thoughts, and the envelope clutched in my hand. Inside was a letter written in Grandma's neat script. Dearest Chandra, if you're reading this, both your grandfather and I have left this world. Please know that our decision to leave our estate to you wasn't made lightly or without careful consideration. Over the years, we've watched you grow into a thoughtful, responsible young woman. We've seen your father's approach to money, his constant reaching for more, never satisfied with what he has. We've witnessed how this mindset has affected his family, his marriage, his relationship with you. We fear that if our estate went to Jeffrey, it would be squandered on the lifestyle he and Patricia aspire to maintain. Lisa, we love her dearly, but she has adopted her parents' values rather than the ones we tried to share with all of you. You, Chandra, understand that wealth isn't just about buying things or status. It's about security, opportunity, and the chance to do good in the world. We trust you to be a good steward of what we've built. This inheritance may cause friction in your family. For that, we are sorry, but we believe in you and your judgment. Use these resources wisely, Chandra. Honor our memory, not by preserving our possessions, but by living according to the values we tried to teach you. All our love, Grandma and Grandpa. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. Their faith in me was overwhelming, but so was the responsibility they had placed on my shoulders. And they were right about one thing: the inheritance had instantly created a rift between me and my family. Over the next week, the calls started. My father alternating between anger and attempts at reconciliation. We're family, Chandra. Your grandparents' wealth should benefit all of us, not just you. It's what they would have wanted. My mother was more direct. We expect you to share this inheritance, Chandra, After all we've done for you. Lisa sent scathing text messages about fairness and family loyalty. The pressure was constant, relentless. I felt cornered, unsure of how to proceed. Then one night, as I reread my grandmother's letter, a sense of clarity washed over me. I knew what I needed to do. The next day, I applied to law school. If I was going to protect my grandparents' legacy, I needed to understand the legal mechanisms that could help me do so. I needed to become the steward they believed I could be. For the next 3 years, I immersed myself in studying law, specifically focusing on estate planning and trust law. My family's anger simmered in the background. Holiday gatherings became battlegrounds of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled hostility. I was the selfish one, the ungrateful one, the one who had somehow stolen what rightfully belonged to all of us. I endured it all, keeping my eye on the goal, understanding how to protect what my grandparents had entrusted to me, not just for my own sake, but to honor their wishes and their memory. Throughout law school, I tried to maintain some semblance of a relationship with my family despite the tension. I would call my mother on Sundays, send birthday cards, and attempt short visits during holidays. The responses were cold at best, hostile at worst. My father would barely acknowledge my presence. My mother would make pointed comments about family loyalty, and Lisa would roll her eyes at anything I said. I learned to accept this new reality, focusing instead on my studies and the small circle of friends I had made in law school. I moved into the farmhouse, finding comfort in the memories it held, and used a small portion of my inheritance to cover my living expenses and tuition. Then, about 3 months before my graduation, something strange happened. The dynamic shifted. It started with a text from Lisa, who had barely spoken to me in 3 years. "Hey sis, been thinking about you. We should catch up sometime." I stared at my phone in disbelief, reading and rereading the message. It was casual, friendly, even as if the years of silent treatment had never happened. Against my better judgment, I responded, suggesting coffee the following weekend. Lisa showed up at the cafe, looking immaculate as always, designer purse hanging from her arm. But instead of the usual disdain, she greeted me with a warm hug. "I've missed you, Chandra," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I think we've all been stubborn for too long." The conversation that followed was surreal. Lisa asked about law school, seemed interested in my classes, my professors, my plans after graduation. She shared stories about her own life, her friends, her part-time job at a boutique. Not once did she mention the inheritance or our grandparents. It was as if she was deliberately steering around any topic that might cause tension. A few days after our coffee date, my mother called. "Chandra, honey," she said, her voice warm in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "Your father and I were thinking it would be nice to have you over for dinner this weekend to celebrate your upcoming graduation." I accepted, though suspicion nagged at me. The dinner was awkward but cordial. My father actually made eye contact with me, asking about my plans after law school. My mother served my favorite dessert, a gesture that felt calculated in its thoughtfulness. As the weeks passed, the attempts at reconciliation intensified. My parents invited me to family dinners regularly. Lisa texted almost daily, sharing memes and asking about my day. My mother started calling to check in, her voice concerned when I mentioned being tired from studying for finals. It wasn't until the third family dinner that the other shoe began to drop. My father, glass of scotch in hand, casually mentioned that his investment firm was going through some restructuring. "Nothing to worry about," he assured, "but things are a bit tight right now." My mother chimed in about rising healthcare costs and how she was thinking about retiring early. "The boutique is doing well, but the stress isn't good for my blood pressure," she explained. Lisa, who had previously boasted about getting accepted to an exclusive study abroad program, now lamented the cost. I really want to go, but it's so expensive. And then there's the apartment I was hoping to get after graduation. The pattern continued. Each conversation included some reference to financial strain or upcoming expenses. The hints became less subtle over time. Dad, did I mention the roof needs replacing $40,000? They're saying. Mom, my friend Judith just got back from this amazing spa retreat. Just what I need for my stress levels, but so pricey these days. Lisa, can you believe the cost of rent in the city? It's practically impossible for someone just starting out. I nodded and made sympathetic noises, but inwardly, my suspicion was growing. The timing was too convenient. The sudden interest in my life too abrupt after years of cold shoulders. The confirmation came on an ordinary Tuesday. Lisa had stopped by the farmhouse supposedly to help me sort through some of our grandparents' belongings. While I was making tea, her phone buzzed on the counter. She was in the bathroom, and I glanced down automatically. The notification preview showed a text from my father. Did she mention the trust, yet keep pushing the college fund angle? My hand shook as I set the mugs down. When Lisa returned, I excused myself to use the bathroom and took my phone with me. I needed time to process what I had just seen. Later that evening, after Lisa left, curiosity and dread drove me to her social media accounts. We were still connected on most platforms, though we rarely interacted online. I scrolled through her recent messages with mutual family friends until I found what I was looking for: a conversation with our cousin Jordan. Lisa, it's working. She's totally falling for it. Dad says we just need to keep playing nice for a few more months until she gets full control of the money. Jordan. And Shell just handed over, just like that. Lisa Shell's always been a pushover. Besides, we're family. She has a responsibility to help us out. Dad already has plans for the farm property, and Mom has her eye on a vacation home in Aspen. I felt physically ill reading the exchange, but I kept digging, finding more evidence of their scheme. In another message to her friend Vanessa, Lisa had written, "After 3 years of giving us nothing, Chandra better be ready to share now. We're talking millions here. Dad says once she has access, we can convince her to at least give us each a cut. She's so desperate for family approval, it's almost too easy." The betrayal cut deep. The reconciliation, the warm gestures, the sudden interest in my life. It had all been a calculated performance designed to manipulate me. They didn't care about rebuilding our relationship. They cared about accessing my grandparents' money. I sat in my grandmother's rocking chair that night, surrounded by the home she and my grandfather had built together. I thought about their letter, about their concerns regarding my father's approach to money. They had seen this coming, had tried to warn me. As painful as the discovery was, it also brought clarity. This wasn't about family or fairness. It was about greed, pure and simple. My family saw the inheritance as something they were entitled to, regardless of my grandparents' wishes. In that moment, I made a decision. I would not let my grandparents' legacy be squandered. I would not be manipulated by false affection and calculated kindness. I would honor the trust my grandparents had placed in me, no matter how difficult the path ahead might be. The next morning, I called a trusted professor from law school, explaining my situation in broad strokes and asking for a recommendation. "I need the best trust attorney in the state," I told him. "Someone with experience in complicated family situations." 2 days later, I had an appointment with Erica Sandoval, one of the most respected trust attorneys in the region. As I drove to her office, my resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about protecting money anymore. It was about protecting myself and honoring the two people who had truly loved me. My meeting with Erica Sandoval lasted nearly 3 hours. I brought all the documentation related to my grandparents' estate, along with my notes about my family's behavior and intentions. Erica listened attentively, occasionally jotting down notes or asking clarifying questions. "Situations like yours are unfortunately common," she said when I finished my story. "Family dynamics can become toxic when significant assets are involved." I leaned forward. "So what are my options?" "Given what you've shared, I think an irrevocable trust would be your best protection," she explained. "Once assets are placed in this type of trust, even you as the grantor can't simply remove them. This provides strong protection against the kind of pressure your family is applying." Over the next several weeks, I worked closely with Erica to design the perfect trust structure. I was still finishing my final semester of law school, studying for finals, and preparing for the bar exam, but this project took precedence. Every spare moment was dedicated to researching different types of trusts and their implications. What if I want to use the money to help my family, but only for certain things? I asked Erica during one of our planning sessions. "That's entirely possible," she assured me. "We can build conditions into the trust. For example, you could specify that funds can be used for educational expenses, medical needs, or even first home purchases, but not for luxury items or business ventures without proper vetting." This approach appealed to me. I didn't want to cut my family off completely on principle, but I needed protection against their manipulative tactics. We designed a trust with specific provisions. First, the bulk of the assets would be protected from any direct claims by my family members. Second, a portion could be used for legitimate family needs like health care, education, and basic living expenses, but only after proper documentation and approval from the trustee. Third, a significant amount would be dedicated to a scholarship fund in my grandparents' names. Finally, I would have access to a reasonable annual income and could make larger withdrawals for specific purposes, like buying a home or starting a business subject to the terms we established. The process was complex and required careful consideration of every detail. Erica brought in a financial advisor to help structure the investments within the trust to ensure long-term stability and growth. We also discussed tax implications and reporting requirements. Throughout this process, my family's pressure intensified. My father called weekly, hinting at business opportunities that needed investment. My sister frequently brought up her desire to move to a better apartment and her study abroad expenses. My mother spoke of medical issues that required expensive treatments, though she was suspiciously vague about the diagnosis. "You seem distracted," Lisa said, during one of her now regular visits to the farmhouse. "Is everything okay with school?" "Just busy with finals and graduation prep," I replied, careful to keep any mention of the trust off my desk and out of our conversations. While I was deep in the process of establishing the trust, I decided to do some discreet investigation into my family's financial situation. I hired a private investigator using my own savings rather than the inheritance money. The report I received was eye-opening. My father's investment firm was indeed going through some restructuring, but primarily because of his own risky investment choices that had lost several clients significant amounts of money. My mother's boutique interior design business was actually doing quite well, but their household spending far exceeded their income. They had 3 mortgages on their primary residence, having repeatedly refinanced to fund their lifestyle. Lisa, it turned out, had already received a substantial scholarship for her study abroad program, but had told our parents it only covered half the cost. The difference, I surmised, was likely going toward the designer wardrobe she flaunted on social media. Most disturbing was the discovery that my father had borrowed heavily from my grandparents in the years before their deaths loans that had never been repaid. The investigator found evidence suggesting my father had actually been skimming from my grandmother's accounts during the last year of her life, taking advantage of her grief and declining health. This information hardened my resolve. I accelerated the trust establishment process working with Erica to ensure every potential loophole was closed. We included specific language addressing potential challenges or claims from family members. You understand that once this is done, it's done, Erica cautioned me during our final meeting. The irrevocable nature means exactly that. Not even you can simply change your mind and dismantle it. I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision, but also a sense of relief. I understand. This is what my grandparents would have wanted. This protects their legacy and honors their wishes. The day after my law school graduation, I signed the final paperwork establishing the irrevocable Miller Legacy Trust. $6 million, the farmhouse investment accounts, cash assets, and personal property of value, all secured in a legal structure designed to protect and preserve. Erica shook my hand firmly. Congratulations, Chandra, not just on your law degree, but on having the courage to make this difficult decision. Many people in your position would have given in to the pressure. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. Thank you for everything. As I left her office, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Big family dinner tomorrow to celebrate your graduation. Your father and I have something important to discuss with you. We'll pick you up at 6. I typed back a simple confirmation, knowing exactly what that important discussion would entail. The timing was perfect. My family had no idea what I had just done, and I was finally ready for the confrontation that had been brewing for years. That evening, I walked through the farmhouse that had been my sanctuary since childhood. The trust ensured it would remain in my care, preserved as my grandparents would have wanted. I ran my fingers along the familiar woodwork, remembering how Grandpa had taught me to sand and refinish the banister when I was just 12. In the study, I opened the safe, hidden behind a painting my grandmother had done of the farm in spring. Inside was a small box containing the final letter my grandmother had written to me, along with copies of financial records documenting my father's loans and the suspicious withdrawals during her final months. I knew tomorrow would be difficult. My family would be angry, perhaps even furious, when they realized what I had done. But for the first time since my grandparents' deaths, I felt confident I was doing the right thing, not just for myself, but for the legacy they had entrusted to me. I slept soundly that night, peaceful, in the knowledge that whatever storm came tomorrow, the foundation my grandparents had built, both literally and figuratively, was secure. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 the next evening. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the front door. My mother stood there in an expensive dress I hadn't seen before, my father beside her in a tailored suit. Lisa hovered behind them, wearing a forced smile and clutching a gift bag with tissue paper sprouting from the top. "Congratulations, graduate," my mother exclaimed, stepping forward to embrace me. Her perfume was overwhelming, a cloud of luxury that seemed to announce her presence before she even entered a room. My father extended his hand for a formal handshake, then awkwardly converted it to a brief, stiff hug. "Proud of you, kiddo," he said, the words sounding rehearsed. Lisa thrust the gift bag forward. "For the future lawyer," she said, with a brightness that didn't reach her eyes. I invited them in, leading them to the dining room, where I'd set up a catered meal. I had deliberately chosen to host the dinner at the farmhouse, my territory where I felt most comfortable and connected to my grandparents. "Wow, you went all out," my mother commented, eyeing the professional place settings and gourmet food. You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to, I replied simply. After all, it's a special occasion. Dinner began with superficial conversation. My parents asked about my graduation ceremony, my plans to take the bar exam, my job prospects. Lisa talked about her upcoming semester, carefully dropping hints about the costs involved. The tension hummed beneath the surface pleasantries, everyone playing their parts in this elaborate charade. My father waited until dessert was served before clearing his throat dramatically. I shared a quick glance with my mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Chandra, he began, setting down his fork. Now that you've graduated and will soon have your law license, I think it's time we had a serious discussion about the family finances. And there it was, the real purpose of this gathering. I kept my expression neutral, waiting. It's been over 3 years since your grandparents passed, he continued. You've had time to grieve and adjust. We've all had time to think about how best to handle their estate. My mother reached across the table, patting my hand in what was meant to be a maternal gesture. Your father and I have given this a lot of thought, dear. We understand that legally the inheritance is yours. But morally and ethically, we believe your grandparents would have wanted their estate to benefit the entire family. Lisa nodded eagerly. They loved all of us, Chandra. My father pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. I've taken the liberty of drawing up a proposal for how we might distribute the assets fairly. He slid the paper across the table. As you can see, it's quite reasonable. I glanced down at the document, taking in the details of my father's plan. According to his proposal, he would receive direct control of 60% of the total assets, including the farmhouse, which he intended to sell to a development company. My mother would receive a lump sum payment of $1 million for retirement and personal use. Lisa would get $500,000 immediately, plus a guaranteed education fund. I would be left with approximately 15% of the total inheritance. My father leaned forward, his expression serious, but with an undercurrent of smugness. As the son of Harold and Eleanor Miller, I believe I should be the primary steward of their estate. They would have wanted me to manage these assets for everyone's benefit. My mother nodded. And frankly, Chandra, your father has the experience to manage these investments properly. You're just starting your career. Lisa didn't even try to hide her excitement. I've already found the perfect apartment in the city, she gushed. And with my portion, I could furnish it properly and still have enough for study abroad and graduate school later. My father continued outlining his plans of vacation home and Aspen investments in his friend's startup companies, a boat he'd been eyeing. My mother chimed in with her wish list, a kitchen renovation, a luxury cruise membership at an exclusive spa. I sat quietly, letting them talk, watching as their thinly veiled pretense of family unity dissolved into naked greed. The farmhouse, where my grandparents had built their lives together, where Id found solace and love, was just a real estate opportunity to my father. The careful investments my grandfather had nurtured were merely funds to fuel my parents' lavish lifestyle. Finally, when they seemed to have exhausted their wish lists, my father pushed a pen toward me. So what do you say, Chandra? Ready to do the right thing for the family? My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady when I spoke. I'm afraid that won't be possible. My father frowned. What do you mean? I mean that I've already placed the entire estate into an irrevocable trust. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face froze, then slowly turned crimson. My mother's smile vanished. Lisa's mouth dropped open. You did what my father finally managed, his voice dangerously quiet. An irrevocable trust, I repeated. All of Grandma and Grandpa's assets, the money, the investments, this house, are now legally protected in a trust structure that cannot be easily changed or accessed. My father slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes jump. You had no right. Actually, I had every legal right, I replied calmly. The inheritance was left to me without conditions. My mother's eyes narrowed. So you've cut us off completely, your own family. I shook my head. The trust has provisions for family support in cases of genuine need. Medical emergencies, education expenses, basic living costs if someone falls on hard times. But luxury items, investment schemes, vacation homes, those aren't covered. Lisa stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. You selfish bitch, she spat. You think you're so much better than us, don't you? My father was nearly shaking with rage. I'm your father. That money should have come to me in the first place. My parents were confused, manipulated in their final years. I felt a flash of anger. Manipulated. By whom exactly? By you, my mother interjected. Always the perfect granddaughter, always so helpful and attentive. You turned them against us. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Is that really what you think happened? Or is that just easier than admitting the truth? My father stood up, looming over the table. I'm calling my lawyer first thing in the morning. We'll challenge this trust, prove undue influence. You won't get away with this, Chandra. I met his gaze steadily. You can try, but the trust was carefully established. I think you'd be wasting your money on legal fees. Money we don't have because of you, Lisa shouted. My mother was crying now, tears streaking her mascara. How could you do this to us, after everything we've done for you? Something in me snapped at those words. Everything you've done for me, I repeated incredulously. Like what exactly? Dropping me off at Grandma and Grandpa's every weekend so you could focus on your careers? And Lisa, forgetting my school events, missing my college graduation? My father's face contorted with fury. You, ungrateful, disrespectful, after all the sacrifices we made? I cut him off. What sacrifices, Dad? Name one significant sacrifice you made for me. He sputtered, unable to come up with a specific example. I stood up slowly. I think this dinner is over. We're not finished here, my father growled. Yes, we are, I said firmly. At least for tonight. I think you all should leave. You can't just throw us out of this house, my mother protested. This is a family home. It's my home now, I corrected her, and am asking you to leave. My father moved closer, his finger pointing at my face. You listen to me, young lady. I'm still your father, and you will show me respect. You will undo this trust nonsense, or, I swear. I stepped back, maintaining my composure. Or you'll— What? Dad cut me off. Disown me. Weren't those threats more effective when I actually needed something from you? His face darkened further. You're no daughter of mine, he hissed. The words hurt despite everything. But I kept my expression neutral. If that's how you feel, then we have nothing more to discuss. Please leave. Lisa grabbed her purse, shooting me a venomous look. You'll regret this, Chandra. When you're all alone with your precious money, you'll realize what you've done. My mother stood frozen, seemingly torn between following my father and trying one more angle to persuade me. Finally, she sighed dramatically. Your grandparents would be so disappointed in you. That was the breaking point. I had endured the anger, the accusations, even the disownment, but I would not let them weaponize my grandparents' memory against me. Actually, I said, my voice tight with controlled emotion. I have something to show you before you go. I walked to the study, aware of my family following behind me, more out of curiosity than compliance. From the desk drawer, I retrieved a thick folder of documents I had prepared for this exact moment. "I think you should see these before you leave," I said, returning to the dining room and placing the folder on the table. "What is this?" my father demanded, not moving to open it. "Evidence," I replied simply. My mother frowned. "Evidence of what?" "Of why Grandma and Grandpa made the decision they did. Of why I made mine." With deliberate calm, I opened the folder and spread out its contents. First, I pulled out printed copies of text messages I'd discovered between my father, mother, and Lisa, discussing their plan to manipulate me. "She's such a pushover, she'll cave once we turn on the family guilt," I read aloud from one of Lisa's messages. "Dad says, just keep playing nice until she gets control of the money." Lisa's face paled. "You went through my phone, that's invasion of privacy." I continued without acknowledging her protest, pulling out the next document. Bank statements showing my parents' extensive debt, their multiple mortgages, their credit card balances totaling over $200,000. Financial records indicating they were spending nearly twice their combined income each month. "How did you get these?" my father demanded, his face now white instead of red. "Legal means," I assured him. "Nothing that couldn't be discovered through proper channels." Next came the most damning evidence: documentation of funds my father had taken from my grandmother's accounts during the last year of her life. Checks with signatures that didn't quite match her handwriting. Transfers to his business accounts that she would never have authorized. "This is why they left everything to me," I said quietly. "Not because I manipulated them, but because they knew exactly what would happen to their life's work if it fell into your hands." My mother sank back into her chair, her expression shifting from anger to shock as she realized the extent of what I had uncovered. My father remained standing, but I could see his confidence crumbling. "You had no right to investigate us," he managed finally, but the righteous indignation had left his voice. "I had every right to protect myself and my grandparents' legacy," I countered, "especially once I realized what you were planning." I pulled out the final document, a copy of the private investigator's report detailing my family's true financial situation. "Dad, you're not in financial trouble because of restructuring at your firm. You're in trouble because you lost several major clients after making risky investments against their explicit instructions. Mom, the boutique is actually doing well, but you're spending far beyond your means. And Lisa, his little startup is nearly bankrupt," my mother whispered, glancing at my father. "I told you not to put so much into it." My father shot her a warning look, but it was too late. The unified front was cracking. "And the medical treatments you claim to need," I said, turning to my mother. "What exactly is this mysterious condition that requires such expensive care?" She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Lisa shifted uncomfortably. "Look, so we exaggerated a little. Family helps family, that's normal." I turned to her. "And your study abroad program, the one you claim you can't afford. I've seen the scholarship letter, Lisa. It covers 90% of the costs." She flushed. "That's different." "It's not different," I interrupted. "It's part of a pattern. You've all been living beyond your means, making poor financial choices, and now you expect me to bail you out using money that my grandparents specifically did not want used this way." My father slumped into a chair, the fight visibly draining from him as he stared at the evidence before him. "I was always going to pay them back," he muttered, almost to himself. "Like you paid back the loans from Grandma and Grandpa?" I asked quietly. "The ones totaling over $300,000 that you never repaid?" His silence was answer enough. I gathered the papers back into the folder. "This is why I created the trust. Not to punish you, not to keep wealth for myself, but to protect what Grandma and Grandpa built and to honor their wishes. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound in the room was my mother's quiet sniffling as she dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Finally, I broke the silence. The trust isn't designed to cut you off completely. It has provisions for real needs. If there are genuine medical issues, the trust can help cover costs. If Lisa needs legitimate educational expenses, that's covered. If either of you faced true hardship, food, insecurity, housing problems, those would be addressed. My father's head snapped up. So you're saying you'll help us, but only on your terms, like some kind of charity case. I'm saying the trust will function exactly as my grandparents would have wanted. I corrected him. Supporting genuine needs while protecting against the kind of spending that got you into this situation in the first place. I don't need your handouts, he said bitterly, though his eyes flickered to the financial statements showing his mounting debt. Mom looked up, her expression calculating despite her tears. What exactly would qualify as covered expenses? I explained the terms clearly. Medical care with proper documentation, educational costs, paid directly to institutions' basic living expenses in case of job loss or disability, even first-time home purchases with reasonable limits. What wasn't covered: luxury items, business ventures, without proper vetting, debt consolidation for existing lifestyle choices, vacation properties. Lisa had been unusually quiet, staring at the table. Finally, she spoke. So, if I really needed help with actual tuition and not just wanted a fancy apartment, you'd help. The trust would help, yes, I confirmed, with verification and payments made directly to the school. She nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. I didn't know Dad took money from Grandma, she said quietly. I didn't know about any of that. My mother shot her a look, but Lisa continued. I just thought you were the favorite, that they liked you more. I didn't know there were actual reasons. I felt a tiny crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. There were reasons, Lisa. But it was never about not loving you, or any of you. They just saw the patterns, and were trying to protect what they'd built. My father stood up abruptly. I don't need to sit here and be lectured by my own daughter. Keep your trust and your conditions. I'll find my own way out of this. My mother hesitated, torn between following him and pursuing the potential financial help I was offering. In the end, family loyalty won out. Chandra, I hope someday you'll realize that family should come first, not money, she said, gathering her purse and standing. That's exactly what Grandma and Grandpa believed, I replied. That's why they made the choice they did. Lisa lingered after our parents walked out. This isn't how I expected tonight to go, she admitted. Me neither, I sighed. But maybe it's better to have everything out in the open. She nodded, then asked hesitantly, that scholarship fund you mentioned, as part of the trust, is that real? It's real, I confirmed. $300,000 set aside specifically for education grants in Grandma and Grandpa's names. She picked up her purse. I should go. They'll be waiting in the car. I walked her to the door. Lisa, I said as she stepped onto the porch, the trust really is there to help with legitimate needs. Not as a handout, but as the kind of support Grandma and Grandpa would have wanted to provide. She paused, then gave a small nod before hurrying down the steps to where our parents waited in the car engine, running headlights, illuminating the darkening driveway. I watched them drive away feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the confrontation was over. Sadness for the family relationships that might never heal. But underneath it all, a sense of peace, that I had done exactly what my grandparents would have wanted me to do. Closing the door, I returned to the dining room and began clearing away the mostly untouched dessert plates. The house felt emptier than usual, but also somehow lighter, as if a long building storm had finally broken, leaving clearer air in its wake. 2 years passed after that fateful dinner. The seasons changed, leaves fell and bloomed again on the old maple trees surrounding the farmhouse, and gradually my life settled into a new normal. I passed the bar exam on my first attempt and took a position at a small but respected law firm specializing in estate planning and family law. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now helping other families navigate the complex waters of inheritance and family dynamics, drawing on my own painful experience. The trust I had established continued to function exactly as intended. The scholarship fund in my grandparents' names had already helped 6 promising students pursue higher education. The farmhouse remained my home, preserved, much as it had been when my grandparents were alive, though I had made small updates to the kitchen and master bathroom. My relationship with my family evolved in ways I couldn't have predicted that night when everything came to a head. My father maintained his stance of pride and rejection. On the rare occasions when we encountered each other at extended family gatherings, he would offer a curt nod and then find reasons to be elsewhere. He had declared me dead to him, a declaration that hurt deeply, despite my understanding of why I'd made my choices. My mother, however, slowly began to reach out. At first, her attempts at communication were stilted and awkward, filled with subtle attempts to revisit the trust issue. But over time, something shifted. After a particularly heated argument with my father about their financial situation, one that a cousin described to me in detail, she began to see me separate from his influence. We started meeting for coffee every few weeks, neutral territory, where we could begin rebuilding some semblance of a relationship. It wasn't easy. Years of resentment and miscommunication created frequent landmines in our conversations. But gradually, we established a fragile peace. Then last winter, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. The treatment was extensive and expensive, exactly the kind of medical situation the trust was designed to help with. When she finally swallowed her pride and called me, I immediately set the wheels in motion. The trust covered her treatments at a top oncology center, providing her with care far beyond what her insurance would have allowed. During her recovery, I visited regularly, bringing groceries and helping around the house. My father remained distant during these visits, but I occasionally caught him watching from doorways, his expression unreadable. Lisa surprisingly became my strongest family connection. Our relationship had always been complicated by competition and misunderstanding, but the revelations of that night seemed to have sparked something in her. 6 months after our confrontation, she called me out of the blue. "I need to apologize," she said without preamble. "I was awful to you. For years, really, but especially about the inheritance." Her candor caught me off guard. I appreciate that I managed to respond. "I've been thinking a lot about Grandma and Grandpa," she continued, "about why they made the choices they did. And the more I think about it, the more I realize they were right. Dad has always been terrible with money, and I was turning out just like him." Over the months that followed, Lisa and I began rebuilding our relationship from scratch. She applied to business school, focusing on financial planning, a choice that would have delighted our grandfather. When she was accepted to a prestigious program, she approached me about using the educational provisions in the trust. Unlike our parents, Lisa followed every procedure to the letter, providing all the documentation and accepting that payments would go directly to the university. I even helped her find an affordable apartment near campus, a far cry from the luxury condo she had once envisioned. Last month, Lisa graduated with honors. I sat in the audience cheering as she crossed the stage. Afterward, she introduced me to her professors and friends. Not as her sister, who controlled the family money, but simply as her sister, whom she admired. That meant more to me than I could express. As for the trust itself, I continued to refine its structure, working with Erica to ensure it would remain robust and effective for generations to come. We established clearer guidelines for supporting family members, created additional charitable components, and invested in sustainable businesses that aligned with my grandparents' values. I learned that being a good steward of wealth isn't just about preservation, it's about thoughtful usage that creates positive impact. Each quarter, I reviewed grant applications for the scholarship fund, often remembering my grandfather as I evaluated the students' financial plans and goals. The farmhouse became not just my home, but a gathering place for those I now considered my chosen family. Friends from law school colleagues who became confidants, even a few distant cousins who had always stayed neutral in the family drama. We would gather around my grandmother's old dining table, sharing meals and stories, building new traditions while honoring the old. My journey hasn't been without loneliness. There are still nights when I sit on the porch swing, watching the sunset over the fields, and feel the absence of my grandparents so acutely it takes my breath away. There are holidays when the estrangement from my father casts a shadow over celebrations. There are moments when I wonder if I could have handled things differently, found some middle path that would have preserved more family bonds. But then I remember my grandmother's words from her final letter. Use these resources wisely, Chandra. Honor our memory, not by preserving our possessions, but by living according to the values we tried to teach you. And I know I made the right choice. The trust wasn't just about money, it was about values, about responsibility, about honoring commitments and intentions. By protecting their legacy, I wasn't being selfish. I was being faithful to what they believed in and what they had taught me. In the end, that's what inheritance truly means. Not just the passing of material wealth, but the transmission of values, wisdom, and purpose from one generation to the next. My grandparents didn't just leave me money and property, they left me a blueprint for living with integrity, for making decisions based on principles rather than pressure. As I continue building my own life and career, I try to keep their example at the forefront of my mind. Every decision, financial or otherwise, is guided by the question, would Grandma and Grandpa be proud of this choice? Am I honoring not just their possessions, but their principles? Sometimes the hardest choices we make are the ones that force us to stand alone. But if those choices are grounded in genuine values and honest intentions, they eventually lead us to where we need to be, and to the people who truly belong in our lives. The trust my grandparents placed in me wasn't just legal, it's the trust they had in my character, my judgment, my heart. That, more than any dollar amount, is the inheritance I cherish most. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that put you at odds with family members? How did you handle the situation, and what did you learn from the experience? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more real-life experiences and lessons learned. Share this with someone who might be going through family struggles of their own. They might find comfort in knowing they're not alone. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the most valuable legacy isn't measured in dollars, but in the wisdom we carry forward.